5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are live. Coming to you live. It's Lichtman live. What happened there? Say hello to the people, Dad.
Hey, good evening.
Good evening.
It's war.
Whoa.
It's all out war.
Whoa.
The Trump administration is waging war against our oldest and one of our finest, most prestigious universities, Harvard University. I have to disclose, I am a Harvard alum.
Yep.
I received my PhD from Harvard. I hate to admit it. In 1973, when I was 9, I was very
wow, that's
precocious.
Impressive.
But
okay.
My comments had nothing to do with my Harvard affiliation. And by the way, a lot of our federal judges have Harvard law degrees or Harvard undergraduate degrees, or both. I hardly stand alone here. And when I use the metaphor of war, I'm not exaggerating. The Trump administration has waged all-out war against Harvard University, withholding billions of dollars in vital federal aid. And let me make clear, this aid not only harms Harvard students, faculty, and affiliates, it harms every one of us, because a good bit, maybe most of that aid was going for medical research and scientific research in areas like cancer and tuberculosis and Lou Gehrig's disease. So don't think it only affects Harvard. It affects every American, because one of the things that have always been a highlight of this country is we are the most scientifically advanced country in the world, and that is the result primarily of university research supported by government funding in part, which now Trump is throttling. But he doesn't stop there. He has also threatened what you might say is the nuclear option, something that is almost never done, and that is getting his IRS to withdraw the educational tax exemption for Harvard University, which would fundamentally harm all of their operations. Obviously, they couldn't operate on a tax-exempt basis. They'd have to pay taxes for any net income that they receive. And all of those donors who built that $50 billion endowment, they could no longer take tax deductions for their donations, putting a real crimp in donations. But do you think the Trump administration has stopped there, Sam?
No.
No. They have also demanded that Harvard provide personal information about international students. International students have become a mainstay of American colleges and universities. I think they're about a quarter of Harvard's enrollment, and they've even threatened to deny the right of international students to attend Harvard, which would be a huge blow, a huge broadside blow right into their finances. This is war. We have never seen an administration so relentlessly going after a private university, probably in the history of the country. You know, the administrations that go after Bob Jones University because of its discriminatory racial practices way back when, but not with the full force that we've seen here. This is really without precedent.
And wasn't that about interracial dating?
Bans on that's why I said it's racial discriminatory policies. Now, the original claim that this was designed to deal with anti-Semitism at Harvard. How credible is that, Sam?
Not credible.
Zero.
Zero?
Zero.
Zero.
You know, supposedly they're enforcing Title VI of the Civil Rights Law. Not only does this administration care nothing about enforcing the civil rights laws, it's throttled the enforcement of our civil rights laws. It is subverted the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, and in particular its voting section, designed to enforce the Voting Rights Act of 1965 as it pertains to marginalized minorities in America. This is an incredibly important and popular piece of legislation. I will quote a former president: "For this nation to remain true to its principles, we cannot allow any American's vote to be denied, diluted, or defiled. The right to vote is the crown jewel of American liberties, and we will not see its luster diminished. To protect all our citizens, I believe the Voting Rights Act should and must be extended." Was that some liberal president, Sam?
I think it was Ronald Reagan.
It was Ronald Reagan in 1981, and the Republicans claim to be the party of Ronald Reagan, and they are tarnishing the legacy of Ronald Reagan by destroying enforcement of the Civil Rights Act. They couldn't care less about civil rights. They couldn't care less about anti-Semitism. You know, this is the guy, Donald Trump, who notoriously invited two awful anti-Semites to a well-publicized dinner at Mar-a-Lago. You know, he said those chanting Jews will not replace us are very fine people. He said, I'm going to blame the Jews if I lose. I can go on and on. He's blamed the Jewish Holocaust survivor George Soros for virtually every ill. So what is this really all about? It's not about civil rights. It's not about anti-Semitism. What's it about, Sam?
Control.
Control. This is the battle. This is Armageddon. This is the battle of the bulge over the attempt by Trump and his allies to control American higher education, to control what we're taught and to control what we think. You've heard me cite many times the path-breaking book, Spin Dictators, which says in the modern world, dictatorship takes place not at the point of a gun, but in the opening of a book. That is through control of what we think and what we believe. And that is exactly what this assault on Harvard is all about. They are getting into Harvard admissions, Harvard curriculum, Harvard teaching, because they want to impose on every educational institution in America the distorted conservative orthodoxy that we saw represented in the 1776 report at the very end of the Trump administration. I've talked about this before. It is such a distorted effort to look at our history and present-day reality and put it solely within the lens of conservative orthodoxy that 47 of the nation's leading scholarly and academic organizations signed a letter from the flagship American Historical Association denouncing Project 1776 as flying in the face of contemporary scholarship. The executive director of the association called it, it's not history, it's a hack job. But it's this hack job, this politically driven view of our history and our society that Trump and his allies are trying to impose on us as part of this spin dictatorship. We've already seen it happening, and I've been an expert witness in a number of these cases at the state level in the imposition of this orthodoxy. Places like Texas, Florida, Iowa, North Carolina. Nicholas Kristof has covered extensively over many decades authoritarian governments, and he validates the idea that attacks on education, on what we're taught and what we believe, is central to authoritarianism. He's talking about the attack on Harvard, which is just the opening salvo in the attack on all institutions of education. Nicholas Kristof says, much of this at Harvard echoes what I've seen abroad. In China, the government has cracked down on elite universities, crushed free-thinking journalism, suppressed lawyers, and forced intellectuals to parrot the party line. In other words, the model here that Trump and his administration is following is not a model of democracy, free speech, openness. It's the Chinese model of authoritarianism. Moreover, when it comes to using the IRS to punish Harvard, that was one of the most notorious things that Richard Nixon was doing in Watergate, using the IRS to punish his enemies, and it's one of the things that drove him from the presidency. There are laws prohibiting anyone in the executive branch from using the IRS for political purposes. In fact, the Obama administration was accused of politicizing the IRS for not granting tax exemptions, supposedly, to right-wing organizations. And guess who rose up in outrage and denounced the political use of the IRS?
Ronald Reagan.
No, this is under Obama. Reagan was dead.
Oh.
All right.
I don't know.
Who do you think? Donald Trump.
Trump.
Quote, I will never allow the IRS to be used as a political weapon, unquote. Donald Trump.
Donald Trump said something that he didn't actually follow through with? That's crazy.
That's hard to believe. It just wasn't Trump. J.D. Vance, quote, if the IRS can go after you because of what you think or what you believe or what you do, we no longer live in a free country, unquote. Ted Cruz, quote, I can assure you that were this a Republican president, or a Republican president doing what Obama was doing, a Republican attorney general, and a Republican IRS that were targeting Democrats, I at least would speak out just as vigorously against it. Because if we are going to respect rule of law, the apparatus of the federal government cannot and should not be used as a partisan tool to bludgeon your enemy, unquote.
You're telling me that these guys don't have a real moral compass and they just say things based off of their partisan position and ideology?
I will let our brilliant audience judge this for themselves. I think these quotes are self-explanatory. Last one, Trump's big ally in the House, Jim Jordan, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, quote, they systematically, the Obama administration, and for a sustained period of time, targeted people for exercising their most fundamental right, their right to speak in a political fashion, unquote. I rest my case.
Wait, you're telling me that Jim Jordan, a guy who allegedly covered up a sex abuse scandal, is full of CRAP?
I don't use those words, but yes.
Wow, I'm shocked.
I am shocked.
Utterly shocked, Dad.
Shocked, right? All right. Before we get to questions, there's a few more things on my mind.
Go ahead.
You've heard me talk at length about the admittedly mistaken deportation of Abrego Garcia to a place where the court said he cannot be deported to. Not just being deported to El Salvador, but put into this hellhole of a prison directly in violation of the constitutional prohibition, Sam, against cruel and unusual punishment, which applies to anyone, not just U.S. citizens. But leave that aside. Just when you thought they couldn't go any lower, they go lower. They have dredged up whatever dirt, however fabricated they can, on Abrego Garcia, even though it has nothing to do with the legality of what they've done. You know, they've compared him to Osama bin Laden. They've called him a terrorist, a gang member, a habitual wife beater, you name it. Whatever dirt they can find, they've used to smear Mr. Garcia, even though, you know, they haven't proven anything, and it's irrelevant to the whole question. In fact, not Abrego Garcia, but who was civilly convicted of sexually abusing and hurting a woman?
Donald J. Trump.
Yes, and who was convicted of 34 felonies? Not Abrego Garcia.
Donald J. Trump.
Exactly. But all of this is irrelevant. We just today had a Court of Appeals decision. Remember what the lower court said. Facilitating does not mean doing nothing. It does not mean, oh, if he's back here, we'll let him in and then deport him. That's nonsense. Facilitate means facilitate. You got to do something to bring him back. I just saw, a couple of hours ago, Trump claiming I can bully all of these foreign nations into fundamentally changing their economic policies. Major powers like Japan and Germany. But I can't get this tiny nation of El Salvador, with which I am pouring millions of dollars in to finance their prisons. I can't get them to release this one guy.
And the funny thing is, too, the Trump administration got the Tate brothers here from Romania who are under investigation. They might have even been under trial for
serious investigation.
Right, for rape, extortion. I'm not sure if extortion was on it, but certainly sex trafficking,
yes,
et cetera, et cetera. So they did that with Romania for 2 criminals.
Right.
Or alleged criminals, at least.
At least indicted or alleged.
Right.
There is no... Garcia has never been indicted for a crime, either in El Salvador or the U.S. He left El Salvador when he was 16. The only evidence against him is this completely bogus confidential informant who says he was a member of MS-13 on Long Island in New York. Why is that bogus, Sam?
He's never lived there.
Never lived there. Never was even there. And the cop who reported it, turns out, was thrown out under difficult circumstances. But we're now in the appeals court. The order of the lower court, which, by the way, the Supreme Court did not deny. It simply sent it back to clarify, which the lower court did. Now it's in the appeals court, and the appeals court upheld the action of the lower court in an opinion written by one of the most conservative judges in the country, a judge who is considered a Supreme Court possibility by conservative Republican presidents like George W. Bush. I'm talking about J. Harvey Wilkinson of the Fourth Circuit. He wrote the opinion upholding the lower court ruling that doing nothing does not facilitate the return of Mr. Garcia. And he was scathing. And keep in mind, this is one of the leading conservative jurists in America. He said, the government's argument that all it must do is remove any domestic barriers to Garcia's return is not well taken in light of the Supreme Court's command that the government facilitate Abrego Garcia's release from custody in El Salvador. But he didn't stop at just blowing a big hole in the government's utterly absurd argument. They tend to be claim we're the party of common sense. What they're doing here utterly defies the common sense meaning of facilitate. But he went a lot further. Keep in mind, here's what this very conservative judge had to say. Quote, the government's argument would reduce the rule of law to lawlessness and tarnish the very values for which Americans of diverse views and persuasions have always stood. I'll repeat that because it is so significant coming from this long-serving, venerable conservative judge. They would reduce the rule of law to lawlessness and tarnish the very values for which Americans of diverse views and persuasions have always stood. They're not going to claim this is some left-wing plant, some crazy, deranged liberal. This is one of the most respected conservative judges in recent times in America. A couple of other things I think we should briefly mention. Another mass shooting. I think this was at Florida State University with deaths and wounded. And mass shootings are the tip of the iceberg of gun violence in America, even though we have more mass shootings in America than our closest peer nations combined, by far. And you are 20 times more likely to be killed by a gun in America than you are by our closest peer nations, the G7 nations, plus Australia. Gun violence is an epidemic. It's one of the leading causes of deaths of our children. Vastly more serious than illegal immigration. As we know, and I've cited the data on this, illegal immigrants commit crime, including murder and violent crime, at far lower levels than native-born Americans. The real problem with violence in America is gun violence. And what is the Trump administration, Sam, doing to prevent gun violence?
They're probably doing a lot to make it even easier for gun violence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They are dismantling the programs designed to research and prevent gun violence, just as they are dismantling programs on scientific health research, health information, vaccinations, you name it. They are making America a vastly more dangerous place. I know there's one more point you want to make, Sam, before we get to questions.
So I don't know if people saw RFK Jr.'s press conference the other day where he was talking about the, quote, epidemic of autism. I thought we should mention it and talk about it. But then I saw a video of a man with autism playing RFK Jr.'s key points and responding to them. So I thought, why not we just play the video and let this this man who knows much better than us talk about it. What do you think?
Certainly much more than RFK Jr.,
Certainly.
the ultimate purveyor of quack science.
Quack, quack, baby. Right,
Yes,
Dad?
this is the quack quack.
This is the quack, quack. All right. Here it is.
Destroys families.
I would argue that heroin destroys families. Autism just makes me not understand social cues.
These are kids who, many of them were fully functional and regressed.
I wouldn't call it regression. I just don't like people. And once I hit 30, I don't give a fuck anymore.
Never pay taxes or go out on a date.
Joke's on you. My boo thing is a homebody too. I did my taxes, so you can shut the fuck up.
Many of them will never use a toilet unassisted. And we have to recognize we are doing this to our children.
Nobody did shit to me. I was born this way.
I didn't realize he cussed so much. I didn't quite realize
That's
that.
all right.
But
how can you pack so many lies into 20
right.
seconds?
But that's why I thought that video
Yeah.
was great, because it confronted all the BS that he was saying with a man who has autism and was like, bro, you're full of it, you know?
Yeah, and just literally, he was speaking there for 20 seconds, and I don't know how many, at least 4 or 5 utter falsehoods.
Well, that was cut together. That wasn't in a row.
But
Yeah.
still, time and again, he just shoots his mouth off, representing his prejudices that have no basis in fact, and demonize people. It's not
Right.
that these children and adults with autism are, some abstract entity. They're real people. Just like the people Elon Musk is firing. They're real people. And RFK Jr., Musk, Trump, Vance, they don't care. They are willing to dehumanize, to demonize, to hurt anyone in this country in order to advance their own either fabricated or self-serving viewpoints.
Right. Anything else before we move on to questions, Dad? You've slid away again.
Oh, no, I've slid. Let me see if I have any other quotes.
Okay.
I think I've got them all.
Okay. So you're good, is what you're saying?
I think we're ready for questions.
You think so?
There's so much more I could say, but we've covered like 4 or 5 topics. That's probably...
There's a lot of people saying in the chat that Van Hollen... There's breaking news that Van Hollen just met with Abrego Garcia.
Oh,
But
that is big news if it's true. Because what I saw even just before we came on the air was that they refused to meet. Van
Right.
Hollen is the U.S. Senator from our home state of Maryland, by the way.
This is from the Associated Press. Maryland Senator Van Hollen meets with Abrego Garcia in El Salvador amid court fight over U.S. return.
Yeah,
So
I
guess
don't know if that's going to help him get back, but that's very important because at least we know he's alive.
Right.
I've been worried that, there's going to be some accident, right?
Right.
Some unfortunate incident like we saw with Jeffrey Epstein. Remember that?
Yep.
And he's going to be dead and the whole thing becomes moot and irrelevant. So I'm really very pleased if this report that just came in is true, that our home state senator was able to confirm that Garcia is alive. I think it's also important that he can get firsthand information about the horrific conditions and inhumane treatment of prisoners at this hellhole in El Salvador, provided Mr. Garcia is free to speak his mind and is not, under control of some kind. Anything further on that?
There's a picture that Van Hollen posted of him with Abrego Garcia.
How does Garcia look? Does he look...
He's wearing a hat.
You can't tell. He looks okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
And they let him get dressed. You saw how the prisoners, in fact, are housed, barely clothed at all.
Right. All right, let's move on to some housekeeping and then some questions. We have a merch form pinned in the chat. We want your suggestions, so drop us a line, click that link, and help us. Help us help you. Give you what you want. We have 450 likes. We have almost 1,300 people watching. We need to get those likes up. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. I see a lot of people asking questions in the comments, but they're not members. So remember, you got to be a member. You got to donate to get priority in questions, because that's honestly, guys, just how we make money.
And we can't answer every question.
And we can't answer every question, obviously. But
I've been even going overtime.
Overtime, working 9 to 5.
Don't ask me to sing that.
Yeah, I shouldn't have done that.
I have some more housekeeping.
Oh, you do? Okay.
It's now a little less than 1 week for my 4 lectures and discussions on the pivotal elections in American history. These are 4 one-hour talks, and you get a chance to question me and speak to me directly about the turning point moments in our history. And all of our brilliant audience gets a 50% discount. I think that's like $22 a lecture.
What?
Barely enough to buy dinner.
Wow.
You couldn't get a bigger bargain than that. And I know a lot of you have said you want to hear more about history, but we can't really do it in the context of the show because there's so much going on, virtually every day. Is Savannah posting?
Savannah, if you could post a link to, that would be great in the chat.
Yeah, the link to my New York 92Y talk. It's done, and we need more people signing up. We're a little bit short at this time, so it would really help us out, and I think be great for you to take advantage of this offer and sign up.
I agree. I have pulled up the Chris Van Hollen tweet. Here it is. He said, I said my main goal of this trip was to meet with Kilmar. Tonight I had that chance. I've called his wife, Jennifer, to pass along his message of love. I look forward to providing a full update upon my return.
Be very interested to hear that update. But it's kind of telling that they let him dress in ordinary clothes. That's not. Do we have a picture of how they actually look in the prison?
Sure. Let me see if
Can
I
you
can
put
find
that
it
up to show the contrast?
Like this?
Yeah. I mean, look at this. They're practically in cages, bare-chested, wearing some, generic...
It's not loading. There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Horrific.
It is, and it is interesting because, you see them come in and they shave their heads, too.
They shave their heads. They practically strip them. They put them in these little cages. But, they dress this guy up for the cameras to make it look like, this isn't, some concentration camp style prison.
I wonder if that's what he was wearing when he got apprehended. It must be, right?
Must be. I don't know where else they'd get that from.
Yeah, I mean, he's got like a Kansas City Super Bowl hat on.
I mean, we don't know for sure, but that's reasonably speculated.
Right.
Has she put up the link to the course?
I wasn't looking. Yes.
Excellent. It would really help us out and be great for you because we are a little short to sign up. It's, as I said, it costs less than a big dinner to get one of these lectures and discussions.
What's the difference between a big dinner and a small dinner?
Size.
Our first question is a $5 donation from CD. They say, 3 things the professor would do to address the issue of gun violence.
I have a whole book on this. It's called Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America. And, of course, the best thing we could do would be to repeal the Second Amendment. I understand that's not going to happen anytime soon, although there is precedent for repealing an amendment. You know what amendment was repealed, Sam? Prohibition. But there are other things that we could do. The biggest thing is national gun violence legislation. There's very good state legislation in some states, and they have vastly lower levels of gun violence than states that are loose on legislation. But obviously, guns can easily cross state lines. So what we need is national legislation. You know, in my book, I talk about 7 or 8 things, but you want me to limit it to 3. Number 1, a ban on assault weapons and mega magazines, 30 rounds or more. Connecticut's has pioneering legislation on this. Number 2, a national gun permit law. Number 3, expanded and reformed background checks that would include not just licensed dealers, but gun shows as well.
Our next question is from member Krasimir Boyanov. They say, Professor, how did Harvard become so dependent on government money?
Because they have such an extensive research program. A lot of this money, maybe even a majority of it, I can't swear to that, but a lot of it goes to scientific and medical research. They have a tremendous affiliation with medical schools and medical programs, and a lot of the money is going for that or for other kinds of scientific research. So the money follows the excellence in medical and scientific research.
Professor, the ongoing squeeze on public universities seems to be contrary to the 1952 Immigration and Nationality Act, or McCarran-Walter Act. Will this tempt STEM talents to go elsewhere?
Oh, I think it will. First of all, they're thinking about restricting foreign students who have U.S. visas that are legal of attending universities. These students provide critical science, STEM expertise when they stay in the United States. Keep them out of the United States. They'll never get here. They will go elsewhere, and we're going to lose vital scientific and technical expertise. This plays right into the hands of what other nations say.
Russia and China.
Yes, especially China, which is
China.
our great rival in technology and science.
You know what? I don't think Trump cares. He's already been very clear that he wants to turn us back to some old manufacturing style of labor and workforce. And if people are less educated, we have less engineers and scientists. That's all good for him because
that's what he wants. People who can't think for themselves.
Right, exactly. Noah says, Professor, as a former teacher now working in county government, I want to first thank you for your continued commitment to the truth and for speaking truth to power. Teachers are already being vilified by right-wing politicians, accused of pushing agendas, banned from teaching accurate history, and surveilled for what they say in the classroom. In your view, how would eliminating the Department of Education further worsen the climate for educators who are already leaving the profession in record numbers?
It would be a disaster for students and for teachers like yourself. And let me tell you, I greatly admire teachers. I teach at the level of the university. So by the time that they get to me, I don't have big discipline problems. They're pretty well educated. Those teaching K to 12 have a much more difficult job than I do. But the Department of Education provides critical aid that support teachers and programs at every level of education. And they are supposed to be monitoring and making sure that discriminatory and retaliatory actions do not take place. You throttle the Department of Education, you remove a lot of vital funding and a lot of vital monitoring. Already seen this kind of thing happening. As I said, I've been an expert witness in some of these cases. And, one of the most egregious was, of course, what's been going on in Florida, where the Commissioner of Education was quoted as saying, we have to police the teachers every day. Can you imagine that? And where they have removed a record number of books from their libraries. And remarkably, we're now seeing this at the federal level. We're seeing all kinds of, I think hundreds of books being removed from the library at the Naval Academy, for example.
Bonnie Miller with a $50 donation. Thank you so much, Bonnie Miller. Yeah, and I don't understand why Trump is considered such a populist. I mean, he's going after teachers. He's going after federal servants. I mean, the core of our nation. It's not like these teachers get paid dirt already and then they get kicked while they're down by these politicians. It's pretty disgraceful.
Yeah, multi-billionaires like Trump and Vance are calling teachers elite, which is, as you say, absurd. Yeah, what do they make? $50,000-$60,000 a year? At the K to 12 level.
I just don't get how people buy that BS.
Yeah, that Trump
crazy.
And Musk are not elites, but teachers struggling, on a minimal salary are elites.
I don't get it. I actually meant to do this before we took questions. I have a Sammy trivia question for you. I'm going to start giving you. You quizzed me so much.
I will not answer trivia questions.
I'm giving
Remember
you.
I said no questions that put me on the spot.
Too bad. You always put me on the spot.
Yeah, but you're young and sharp.
These are history questions.
Oh, no. That's even worse. Then I'll be embarrassed.
Here's the first Sammy trivia question of the year. You ready?
No.
Who was the first president to use a flush toilet in the White House? Do you have any idea?
Grover Cleveland.
No, incorrect.
All right,
I'll give you one more guess.
I have no idea.
One more guess.
Calvin Coolidge.
Incorrect.
All right.
Millard Fillmore was the first.
Of course, everybody knows about Millard Fillmore.
Was the first president to use a flush toilet in the White House.
I'm not embarrassed by missing that one, I'll tell you the truth.
Our next question is from Ben England. They have two questions, it seems. They say, I have a question about the study of history. The what-ifs of history can be compelling, but does contemplating the what-ifs fall under the role of a historian, or is that outside the scope of the discipline?
A lot of historians do examine what-ifs. Robert Fogel, for example, the late Robert Fogel, was a Nobel Prize-winning economist who studied history, and one of his famous books was a what-if book. What if we didn't have the railroads? Would economic growth be throttled, or would canals and other forms of transportation suffice? I don't like what-ifs myself, and you heard me say many times I don't like hypotheticals or speculation. So I don't generally deal with what-ifs because it is speculative. You have no way of knowing. But, some pretty famous historians like Fogel have ventured into what-ifs.
What does, quote, constitutional crisis actually mean, and how have we navigated them in the past, if we've even had them?
Well, obviously, the ultimate constitutional crisis was the crisis of the Southern secession, when Southern states believed that they had a right to leave the Union and form their own country. And, of course, the Unionists said no. There is no right to leave the Union under the Constitution. And sadly, that constitutional crisis was resolved how, Sam?
A war.
A war. It was only resolved through the Civil War, which firmly established there is no right to leave the Union. Although we hear rumors every once in a while, Texas is going to secede from the Union, or, Southern California, but there is no basis for that. Constitutional crisis that did not lead to war was in the 1930s, when the Supreme Court invalidated key elements of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, his agricultural recovery agency, the Agricultural Adjustment Agency, and his industrial agency as well. And that led FDR to propose his so-called court packing plan to replace justices who reached a certain age, if they didn't retire, with another justice. And that constitutional crisis was resolved peacefully. FDR's court packing plan was rejected even by his own party, and the Supreme Court evolved naturally through FDR making his own Supreme Court appointments.
James Lagruta asks, RFK Jr. is proposing that food stamps not be allowed to purchase soda. I personally think this may be a good move. What are your thoughts?
I drink soda.
But you're not food stamps.
But I'm not food stamps. Probably soda is not a good thing for people to drink. But I thought that the Republican administration believed in personal choice, personal freedom, personal responsibility, and this seems to be contrary to that. And, are we going to now put a whole series of restrictions on all kinds of federal? They're also talking about work requirements for food stamps, for example. So I'm very leery, believe it or not, about the government stepping in and telling people, even recipients of aid, what they can and can't do.
What do you think is next in terms of what the administration does?
Well, what I fear, and I hope is not next, is martial law. Trump has kind of hinted at using the military for martial law. That's one of the reasons why he's constantly talking about voter fraud, constantly pushing this, because that may give him the justification for declaring martial law, which is not that difficult, unfortunately, in the United States, and then truly becoming an authoritarian. That's my biggest fear, along with lots of others.
I think the next big thing, this isn't necessarily new, but I saw today that the Supreme Court is going to hear the birthright citizenship decision. I think that could have tremendous impact on this country, depending on what the Supreme Court does.
You're absolutely right. As I said, I highlighted one, but there are lots of others. And I am now in the process of working with other leading historians in America in writing an amicus brief explaining why what Trump is doing is not just contrary to what the Supreme Court had said in 1898, but contrary to the intent of the framers and the meaning of the amendment.
In Your Face New Yorker says, after RFK's comments about autistic people the other day, are we looking at the possibility of autistic people being sent to places like El Salvador and their prison? As an autistic person, this concerns me deeply.
Boy, I sure hope not. That would be, an ultimate step in violating basic decency and human rights. But Trump has mused, has he not, Sam, about sending American citizens to the hellholes in El Salvador in, again, utter disregard of the Constitution, which prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. But I put nothing past Donald Trump. But I think attempt to do this just because you're autistic and send you to some hellhole in El Salvador, no matter how conservative the Supreme Court might be, I don't think they would buy that. But who knows whether Trump is going to obey the courts. Remember what I said many, many times, long before what's happening now, Sam. Trump is not going to openly say, I am not going to obey the courts. But what is he going to do? That he's always done.
Twist and delay and deflect and all
exactly.
Whatever.
So in practice, defy what the courts are telling him, like he's doing with this utterly twisted, crazy meaning of facilitate.
They also add, they say, I want to comment on what you said the other day about, quote, poor children suffering from autism. I honestly cringed at that. For a huge chunk of us, our suffering isn't from autism itself, but from the way people treat us when they don't understand. Growing up, I was bullied by both peers and teachers, and trying to get a steady work is a living hell because most people can't be bothered to try to understand. I am largely a happy person when I met with understanding. And that's what they wanted to add.
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant. I think you took what I said out of context, and I'm sorry if you misunderstood it, but I made exactly the right point, that the fault is not of those who have autism, however that might be defined, but the way you and others are being treated. Prime example we just showed you with RFK Jr.
Isn't Elon Musk autistic?
I don't know.
Maybe that's, I don't know. Anyways, that's not really...
Probably someone in our brilliant audience will know.
Next. During Trump's first term, several senior cabinet members were terminated or resigned under pressure. Notable exemptions include Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State, who was dismissed, Jeff Sessions, who resigned,
Attorney General
Tom Price, Jim Mattis, who resigned, but was widely seen as being pushed out. The turnover rate in the Trump administration was notably high. Dr. Lichtman, in your opinion, which cabinet members will be first to go? Marco Rubio, Howard Lutnick, or someone else to be blamed for the failed leadership by POTUS in foreign and domestic affairs?
There's a big difference between the first cabinet and this one. These were respectable folks and others as well. Somewhat. But
Jeff Sessions is not that respectable.
No, Jeff Sessions, but, he was a United States Senator. They didn't pluck him out of nowhere. Yeah, I was not a big Jeff Sessions fan, I have to say. But, Rex Tillerson, head of Exxon, Jim Mattis, a well-respected general. I would also mention General Kelly, the chief of staff. There's no one like that anymore. He has now chosen not just cabinet members, but high officials in jobs like Director of National Intelligence or head of the Office of Management and Budget, critical positions, loyalists, sycophants. So it's a very different situation this time than it was during his first term. So, there's no way to know who might become so afoul of Donald Trump that they get pushed out. It could be anyone.
All right, this is a long one.
But they'll make it too long. We're getting late, aren't we?
9:46.
Yeah, we're getting, try not to make it too long. That's too long.
What do you want me to do? It's a quote. Can you read it?
I'll just read it.
Speed read it. But people won't know what you're...
Yeah, you got to read it or at least read part of it, but it's way too long.
They say, I want a trope, chapter 24 of Mark Twain's memoir, Life on the Mississippi, 1883, and ask Professor to comment. Thank you, Professor. If you can say a few words about this. Twain wrote, how should I read this? Should I take it how I see it?
Let's just do that first line. That's really enough. That very first line says it all.
Okay. You
take the lies out of him, and he'll shrink to the size of your hat.
Right.
You take the malice out of him, and he'll disappear. A very prophetic quote that couldn't apply better to Trump and his cronies. They depend, I need to keep saying it. They depend upon lies. Their entire system is built upon lies. The fact checkers documented over 30,000 lies just in Donald Trump's first term, far more than all prior presidents combined, and that has continued. So take the lies out. Indeed, you shrink this big edifice down to the size of your hat. I don't wear hats, but I think you do.
You wear beanies.
Beanies, right. For the cold. You take the malice out of him and he'll disappear. Yes, the other side of what Trump and his allies represent is clear malice, revenge, retribution, going after our enemies, having no concern for the suffering of others, but only advantages to ourselves. Mark Twain was in so many ways prophetic, and this line is very much so.
This is a question from one of our Discord members. If you want to join our Discord, go into the description of this video, hit our Linktree link, and then at the top of that, there should be a bunch of icons. There should be a Discord icon. Click that, and you can join our Discord. This is from Jaden. Professor, judging from history and what you know about it, will invoking the Insurrection Act and or martial law mark a point of no return for this administration? If so, what can we do? If not, what does it actually mean?
I think it would mark a point of no return to use martial law to either prevent or subvert an election, to engage in the apprehension, detention, and perhaps the deportation of U.S. citizens without due process of law. It really would turn us into an authoritarian nation. There's not much that can be done, sadly, if he invokes that. You got to get in the streets. There's got to be so extensive numbers of people protesting that they can't round you all up. They can't put you all in jail. You have to contact your representatives, your senators, and see what they can do. Maybe this will even be a bridge too far for some of the waning band of moderate Republicans. Support organizations like CREW and the ACLU. And this is a nightmare scenario. Martial law was never meant to be a means for persecuting U.S. citizens or even U.S. residents who are not U.S. citizens. It was supposed to be historically a means of protecting the United States from foreign enemies or a major internal insurrection like the Whiskey Rebellion under the Washington administration.
Cynthia Gutierrez says, I just signed up for your roundtable course. So excited. Birthday gift to myself. There you go.
Awesome. Please
Cynthia.
follow her lead. It'll be great.
Say thank you, Cynthia.
Cynthia, thank you so much.
There you go.
I really appreciate it.
Can the presidential immunity decision by the Supreme Court be amended?
Well, you can pass a constitutional amendment. And what are the chances of that, Sam?
Very low.
Yeah, it takes 2/3 vote of both houses, 3/4 ratification from the state. The last substantive constitutional amendment was way back in the early 1970s. You know what amendment that was? Very relevant to young folks. The 18-year-old vote. Haven't had anything of note in, 50 some odd years. And the only other way it can be amended, which is more likely, although still unlikely, would be if you get a new court composition and they revisit the decision. Remember, this court just overturned Roe versus Wade. So no Supreme Court decision is immune from subsequent amendment or even overturning.
The 2020 BLM protests were half a decade ago come May. Is that true? I guess so, yeah.
Yeah.
What are the long-term effects of the protests, if any? Could you maybe dedicate a stream talking about them / racism in the United States?
I think that's a very good idea. I'd be happy to talk about it, but obviously not in the last 10 minutes of the session. But I will say the results are very mixed and not what the protesters hoped for.
Oops. 9:52. How many more questions? You getting? We can end early if you're tired.
No, I'm good to go.
What?
Yeah, our brilliant audience always energizes me.
Wow.
So let's keep going.
What is your overall political philosophy? We've learned a lot about your beliefs, but it'd be interesting to know your overarching political beliefs. For instance, what the government's role should be, social values, economic, environmental, etc.
So I can summarize my whole life in 2 minutes?
Well, it's 53. You got 7 minutes.
I don't want to take all the time. But I'm not going to dodge this question, though. But I'll have to give a brief answer. But again, if you tune into my course, we can discuss things like this at much greater length. At any rate, here is my philosophy. Remember, I've summed up American politics in one sentence, Sam. What was that?
Republicans have no principles. Democrats have no spine.
And I will summarize my political philosophy in one sentence.
Oh.
Believe it or not. I am a progressive with a libertarian twist. And I'll go beyond that one sentence to give you a very quick explanation. That is, to add a second sentence, I believe that government is doing not enough to meet our needs and too much to interfere with our private lives. That is, government could do more to establish a much better healthcare system, education system. Childcare. I mean, I can go on, deal with civil rights. But on the other hand, we have government directly intruding into our private lives. No better example than the draconian anti-abortion laws passed by so many conservative Republican states that puts the government right in people's private lives and bedrooms.
I believe your 2006 Senate run, your slogan was, There's too much government intruding in our private lives and too little government meeting our needs.
Wow, you remember that?
I remember that.
How
pretty
old were
good.
you then?
Well, I've watched the your campaign ad since then, and
Wow.
you say that.
That's
in it.
You got it exactly right. That was my political philosophy, and I still hold it today.
This is from Kalia B. How can Pam Bondi be disbarred?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not an expert on this, but
What if this whole time you're like, I'm not a lawyer, and then like on our
But-
200th episode, you're like, just kidding, guys. This whole time I've been a secret lawyer.
Yeah.
I got my law degree when I was 23, and I never told anybody, and I'm a secret lawyer, and I know about the opera, and
I am not a secret opera fan or a secret lawyer, I can assure you. But I do know a bit about this, and anyone can make it a complaint to the bar. You don't have to be a lawyer to make a complaint to the bar. I don't think it would make any difference for her heading up the Justice Department. I'm not sure you have to be a member of the bar to head the Justice Department, but it would certainly be an enormous black eye for her and the Trump administration. So if you got something on Pam Bondi, go right ahead and make a bar complaint. Anyone can do it.
how about I just don't like her that much? Does that count?
Probably won't fly, but who had his bar license revoked? What very famous Trump loyalist?
Rudy Giuliani.
Rudy Giuliani.
No,
exactly.
I called him Rudy Giuliani.
Giuliani.
That's
It's
pretty
much,
funny,
much,
right?
much better.
That's pretty funny, right?
Giuliani works
Yeah.
for me. Ha ha.
How about clips of RFK Jr. not even knowing what Doge is cutting from what he reported overseas?
Yeah, that's a good idea. He knows nothing. You know, when he was asked about what are the biggest programs, health programs that he oversees, Sam? The two huge federal health programs. Follow me?
Medicaid.
Medicaid and Medicare.
You didn't let me do the second one.
Sorry. Thought you were done. We're getting late.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to cut things. He didn't even know what they were or how they operated. He knows nothing. He is a purveyor of ignorance and quack science, and it is a tragedy beyond tragic that he is the chief healthcare officer of the United States. And by the way, the measles epidemic has shown no signs of stopping. There are now, I believe, more measles cases just in a few months this year than entirely in either 2024 or 2023. And a lot of it, almost all of it, as I understand it, is attributable to falling vaccine rates. And RFK Jr.'s attack on vaccines is directly relevant to that.
Nan B says, I am now convinced that nothing Trump does will be held accountable. He is the ruler of all of us, and there is no court in this land that can stop him. Can you please prove me wrong? Please.
I wish I had the power, Nan B, to prove you wrong. I don't. But Trump is experiencing defeat after defeat after defeat in the courts of law. Whether that will stop him or not is not entirely clear. But I think if the Supreme Court ratifies what's going on in the lower courts, it may well stop him or provoke another constitutional crisis.
All right, our final question of the night before we wrap up. I guess what's happening right after this?
Sammy's after show.
That's so true. So
I was right on it.
So make sure you stay tuned for that. Savannah, if you could put the link to that in the chat, that'd be great. Our final question of the night is, will Trump get rid of Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell? And has any president fired the chair before?
I'm not aware of presidents firing chairs before their term is up, but I'm always reluctant to say I can prove a negative. It's possible that it's happened. It's always very hard to prove a negative, but I'm not aware of it happening. And I'd say it's better than 50-50 that Trump will do it. Because remember, he said, I can do whatever I want as president. Remember, he pushed out the FBI head who was just a few years into his 10-year term and was supposed to be above politics.
Right. I heard a report today saying that the president might not have the power to fire the Fed chair, but again, that doesn't stop him.
Yeah, that's not going to stop him. And,
but it might make Powell stay in his chair.
Maybe Powell will decide it's just not worth fighting this.
I heard him say today in an interview saying that he was not leaving, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, of course he's going to say he's not leaving.
Right.
But when push comes to shove, we never know what people might do. I would hope he has enough spine to stand up to Trump, but that remains to be seen.
All right, with that, we will wrap up Lichtman Live for the night, April 17th, 2025. What are your final words to the people, Dad?
There is nothing more important than preserving impartial, truth-based education and keeping our educational institutions that have made us the world's leader, not just in science, but in so many other fields. My field of history, sociology, various technological fields. We are the world's leader in intellectual enterprise, and that is part of our great strength as a nation and part of why we have maintained ourselves as a democratic republic. There is nothing more important to defend.
A couple of shout-outs to some donations. Everett Tosher, Greganor 98, Deborah Fiore, and Kathy Crandall. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. And don't forget to sign up for my lectures.
Right. The Lichtman Live post show comes up in a few minutes. Stick around for that, guys. See you soon. Say goodnight, Dad.
Good night, all.